Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. And I have a very special guest today. Welcome, Mozzie. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Mozzie contacted me through email, and I am so glad that he did because he has an absolutely fascinating story. And I say that knowing very little of the story at this point, but just what I know already, I know this is going to be a great conversation. And so I really appreciate you reaching out.
Well, thanks. I'm so glad to be here and just to kind of amplify some queer voices in the community. I've kind of noticed on the atheist YouTube sphere, I feel like I haven't seen as much queer representation, and it could just be that there's some creators that I've missed, but I think that there's some really important stories that we talk about a lot of these things in human rights. In the macro, but then to actually understand some of these experiences and the consequences of harmful ideas down in the micro level kind of gets missed because it's a difficult conversation to have and do
Mhm.
so respectfully. And so that's something where I don't have my own platform, but I want to bring that into the discourse because I think it's really important.
So, how do you identify? What is your gender?
Um, That's a complicated question. I would say generally non-binary with people that I'm close with, I'm fine with he, they. But I have just felt really kind of choked by how I think culturally our gender norms and gender performance expectations are pressed on male presenting people, and I haven't really fit well in that paradigm most of my life. And so until we get looser definitions on what it means to be a man, I don't think I'm going to fit in that category.
Okay. Okay. Um, Now, normally when I do a stream, I have links to where you can reach my guest outside of the show. And I did not with you because we did not use your real name. Mozzie is not his real name. Um, is there some place where there's a safe name that someone can reach you by, or should we just stick with what we've got?
We'll stick with what we got, and if I end up, becoming more involved or something, and you'll be the first to know, and we can share that information.
Okay, that sounds great. So if you're looking for a way to contact Mozzie, you need to hold off for now. Okay, let's start with your story. When did you first realize that you were not like everybody else, and what happened at that point?
I think I knew pretty early on, but it's one of those things even as early as elementary school, I wasn't equipped with any kind of language to help me identify why I felt maybe a little bit different from my classmates and things of that nature. And so I think I had a sense early on, but I didn't get the language for that until middle school. And unfortunately, the language came when the slurs and some of the discomfort and the bullying starts happening with other people who are kind
Mm,
of insecure as we're
mhm.
all going through this really awkward stage of early puberty and middle school. So unfortunately, that's when the language came in, and so did a lot of the internalized homophobia from the prejudices that were around at that time in the early 2000s. I feel like the culture and the climate is a lot different then. Um, and I wonder what it would be like if I had gone through um, high school now. I think I would have had a completely different experience because I do feel like generally with social media, it's had a big impact on people being visible. So.
Purple has a really good idea here. Purple says, Mozzie, please be sure to read the comments section for this video, since that's the only way that people can leave you a message. So yeah, you can
Okay.
interact directly with people through the comments in the video. Great idea,
Okay.
Purple. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so when did you first let your parents know that you did not identify as a cis male?
So actually, that was something that was taken from me. That was
Mm,
not a choice that I got to make. That was a choice that my first abuser, my first conversion therapist, did to me. So that happened my freshman year of high school. I was 14 at the time.
Okay, so you were why were you in conversion therapy if nobody knew that you were not a straight cis male?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I was struggling on kind of all fronts at the end of middle school. It was just very difficult and complicated, not only just trying to reconcile like this internalized homophobia I had that was given to me both by the church, but like I kind of just felt like the community in general and the culture. But then also, I just felt I was really struggling with like social anxiety and performance anxiety in relation to like school and sports, um, and just struggling with depression in general as well. And so I finally got to my breaking point with my life, and I just asked my parents, I was like, I need help. And so they found a therapist office that was in South Carolina where I grew up. And, it did have licensed clinical, like, professionals, so it had LPCs and some PhD people. I don't know if they necessarily could write prescriptions, but it was people who
They would
had
have to be a
true qualification.
psychiatrist to do that.
Yeah, so I don't know that they had those, but they had licensed professional counselors, and it just so happened that it was, um, like, owned, I think, by a Lutheran church, but it was a secular like, practice,
Mhm,
if that makes
mhm.
sense. So, like, they said that they had Christian affiliations. And my parents thought that that would be good because, like, "Oh, well, we're Christian," and so just understanding that backdrop, they thought could just help in my situation in therapy. Um, and despite billing with insurance and being licensed professional counselors, um, as soon as I disclosed that I experienced at the time what I called like same sex attractions, um, regardless of all the other things that I had come wanting to work on in therapy as a 14-year-old, we didn't talk about anything else. It was, we pivoted, and my therapist was making active efforts to change my sexual orientation.
I see, I see. And can you share what some of the things are that the therapist did, or is that too difficult or something you would rather not do?
No, that's fine. I don't mind sharing. I have some notes on things too, just to help, like, for clarity's sake.
Okay,
But so just like to kind of start off the bat, I do want to like really define conversion therapy. So like
okay,
the way that I'm defining and like using this word, I would say it's like not an active effort to help someone like abstain from unwanted sexual desires, but it's an active effort to manufacture like a heterosexual or a cisgender identity.
I
Um,
see.
and so, like, it I wanna be really clear, like, it wasn't just, "Don't do this," but, like, we're gonna do the opposite as well, which I think makes it that much more heinous.
Mhm,
Um, so, I think I disclosed to, this LPC, about, like, my same-sex attractions in probably, like, our 2nd or 3rd session, and it was, like, immediately, like, the sirens were going off for him, and one thing that I've noticed that seems common across multiple survivor stories is these individuals tend to want to like try and find something that they can blame it on. So I didn't come from a single family household or a single parent household, like um, or any of these things, but one thing that did happen, my dad had served 2 active duty tours when I was younger, and so oh, I see that comment. Well, hey there, friends.
I have a couple other comments starred, but I don't want to interrupt your story, so I'll bring them up later.
But yeah, so just to tie up this thought, I'll try and make it succinct. But my therapist was trying to blame it on my dad's deployment. It was like, aha, so that's like the culprit.
Oh,
Um,
brother.
I know, and
Your dad was absent, so you became gay.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what the conclusion was. And then he also said that there were probably some neural pathways in my brain that had been like crossed incorrectly. And so he compared that to like the Pavlovian response with the dogs and the bell and the steak and all that stuff. So he was like, so we're going to do exercises where we associate these same sex attractions with like the most reviling things that you can think of, and then associate women with like pleasure and things that you find, I don't know, good or whatever.
Mhm,
So just like, these were supposed to be integrated into my everyday life. He also like I was really uncomfortable with one conversation that I had with him, but like it was towards the end of our time together, like, and I probably saw him for about 6 months and then I was cured. Um, but
well, that's wonderful. No more
yeah,
talking,
I
you're
know.
cured.
Um, and but it was, like, towards the end of our time, and he's like, "I think you're ready for this step where, like, if you see, like, a young woman and she has, like, a really nice butt, then, like, don't lust after her, but, like, thank God for her beauty and her voluptuous breasts." And it
Uh-huh,
was just very uncomfortable to hear this, like, middle-aged man telling, like, a young person like me who's already just super uncomfortable in this time of my life anyways, to then be talking about like basically my classmates in such
mhm.
a like sexualized manner. It was just very bizarre. But those are like some of the things that like really stick out as part of like my treatment while I was
Mhm.
seeing him.
Okay, a couple of comments that we had. What the Beck says everyone is welcome on my channel. Matter of fact, I stream tomorrow if you'd like to have an umbrella chat, Mozzie.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe Godless Granny, you might be able to put us in touch.
Are you on Twitter?
I am not.
Okay. Send me, well, I'll send your do you want me to send your email address to Beck? Because
Yeah,
that
that would
has
be
your real
fine.
name
That
on
would be
it.
fine. I'd be comfortable with
Okay.
that.
Okay. All right. And then Purple also said, it took me a few months to find a therapist who did not have religious affiliation like that. Yeah. Um, that's an issue here too. Almost most of the therapists have some kind of religious affiliation. And I know exactly what you mean about the church having an affiliation. I took my son to a therapist for a while that was associated with the church. And the church actually owned the building and grounds that the therapy group was on. And I believe there was some kind of sharing of funds, I don't know. But at one point, the therapist said, well, we're no longer allowed to practice here because the state told us that the church can't own a business. And this is not
Mm,
a ministry. They'd always billed it as a ministry, but it really wasn't. They were charging fees
right.
for their services. And they said, yeah, they told us we're a business, we're not a ministry, so we have to leave.
Yeah, just broader, but like it's very difficult to find good mental health service providers, I feel like, in the States. But then also you run into the issue of like, is it covered by your insurance? And when I found like I see a therapist who specifically specializes in like deconstructing from Christianity. And when I discovered him, he didn't accept my insurance, but I was like, well, I need to get better, you know? So
Mhm,
it's a tough thing. And then as much as we would like people to abide by the ethics of the profession, that obviously didn't happen in my case here when I was a minor. Um, and so, yeah, people can sometimes bring their prejudices into the clinical space with the client. And that's what we don't want to happen. But unfortunately, it does.
mhm. At that point, did you still believe in Christianity?
Yeah. So I'm a pretty recent deconvert, I would say. So, um, I had a second experience with conversion therapy as a young adult when I was in undergrad at the church that I was attending.
Mhm.
Um, and it really exacerbated all of the baggage that I carried with me from my first experience of abuse as a minor. But after I left college, I deconstructed, even though I didn't know that's what I was doing. And then I identified as an agnostic theist for several years. And I really feel like my humanism was what was informing my God concept. And then
Mhm.
it just got to a point where my God concept was so far from anything canonical, and I just realized that it wasn't rooted in anything. And so I became comfortable with like, you know what? I'm okay just shedding it all now.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
really, I think part of why I held on to it for so long was I was trying really hard to advocate for queer people specifically, being able to engage in spirituality and their religion in a way that shouldn't harm them. And so I wanted to help try and make that space, but in the midst of that, I ended up losing my own faith. And so now um, I'm excited by the advocacy for human rights that I see happening in the atheist community, and so I think that that's kind of like where I see myself moving forward.
Frankenstein commented, I'm straight, but it would seem to me that many LGBTQ and are more at home here in the atheist skeptic humanist crowd than almost anywhere else. So Mozzie should feel right at home.
Yes. And it's really unfortunate because, depending on the types of churches that you're familiar with, like, I mean, I came from probably a more fundamentalist, like very much SBC type church environment, but they always are like, come as you are. But they don't actually mean that. They mean come as you are in the way that we're comfortable with.
Or come as you are so we can fix you.
Hmm.
There was a meeting that I went to where we were supposed to brainstorm ideas for changes we wanted to make in the church. And we were divided into groups of about 5 people. And one of the instructions we were given was do not make any negative comments about anyone else's ideas. Just let people express their ideas. We'll sort through the good ones and the bad ones later. And one of the women in my group said, we should have an outreach to the LGBTQ community. And then when the people come in, we can have them sit down with the elders and the elders can read Romans to them. And I was just face palming. I mean, I was still a believer at this point, but I was inwardly face palming that this is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. And I can't say it. Now, from the deconverted me wishes I would have just got up and left.
Hmm.
But at the time I was just and what the kicker, the final kicker was after she expressed that idea, she went like she was so clever in coming up with this idea of luring people in so we can tell them what abominations they are.
Yeah. I'm at this point where, if there are any Christians listening, don't show up to my spaces, please. Like, don't come to my pride, unless you are intending on walking with us and supporting us. Please don't be there, like, because there's nothing you can say to us as a community that we haven't heard before or
Mhm.
heard worse. We all know who Jesus is. So you're not coming with anything new here.
Mhm. Now, going back to the second therapist that you saw as an undergrad, did you refer yourself to that therapist? Did your parents have anything to do with you going to that therapist?
So my what I consider my second experience of conversion therapy happened in a church setting with someone who was not a clinician.
Mhm.
And so I'm musical. I play a bunch of instruments. And I was participating in the band at this large mega church. And there were like uh, things that were like strongly encouraged to be able to participate at a, a more leadership level. So, like, whether you were involved in anything from like the tech of running a service every Sunday to setting things up or actually being like congregation facing in the worship ministry, you had to participate in like the church small groups that happened on like a weekday basis. And then there was a really strong encouragement to like have some more, I guess, like intimate mentorship, discipleship. I don't know quite what word to use with that, but
Mhm.
with someone in the church. So I pursued that with the worship leader who
Mm,
I was already like well acquainted with after having been on the worship team for a year. And I thought
mhm,
like this made a lot of sense. Um, and it was another just very similar situation where uh, within a couple of times of meeting, like I disclosed this as something that's a part of my life. And at the time, like I would have identified that as same sex attraction, but like, just like, it's more like, okay, this is so you know, but like, it's not like it necessarily occupies a lot of my headspace right now because I wasn't really interested in dating when I was in school, anyways. As a design professional, like my curriculum was extremely grueling. Um, and so I wasn't particularly keen on that. But my worship pastor at this mega church was pursuing his master's degree in biblical counseling. And
mm,
he brought it upon himself, like basically what I wanted to be mentorship and just in like life in general became once again hyper fixated on this one thing. And I
mhm.
never got just like what I was hoping would be like kind of young adult life skills from this other person who was like maybe 10 years older than me. And I thought like could have like some really good insight on like kind of as I transitioned into like this next stage of my life, leaving school and stuff. That's not what it was. It was once again active attempts not just to repress part of this like fundamental part of my identity, but like change it,
Mhm,
and it
mhm,
was disastrous. It destroyed my early 20s,
mm.
really and truly, to the point where, like, he facilitated a relationship with a young woman that
Oh,
I was
goodness
in.
gracious.
So I was in a dating relationship with a young woman in spite of him having knowledge of like this is not going to work because he felt that God had promised him that I would marry a woman, which spoiler for everyone watching, I just got married to my husband in July. So
Oh,
that did not happen.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Mm.
So anyways, was not in the cards for me. But yeah, I mean, just um, the hubris involved here.
Well, not to mention the fact that they're using her too. I
Yeah,
mean, she was used as much as you were.
absolutely. And let's see. Last year, I went. Oh, thank you guys for all of the congratulations in the chat. Thank you. Um, but about 18 months ago, with like after a lot of intense therapy over several years, just like kind of unpacking all of this trauma. And then, having just some really good and supportive friends. I went back and I confronted my second abuser in person and
Oh, nice.
talked to him about the harm that he did.
Uh-huh.
Um, and asked
That
him,
took a lot of strength.
it was extremely difficult. And I came prepared with a script that I asked him if he would just be polite and just let me share, and then we could have a conversation. But one of the things that was really important to me was like, um, I was like, I need you to apologize for the harm that you caused this young woman because I was involved and there were things that I had already apologized to her for years before after all of this happened because it was really messy when it fell apart. Um, but he didn't take ownership. He
Of course
punted
not.
on that. But I went back to her, like, we had already like, she was one of my good friends who then I was encouraged to pursue her, and he facilitated this, and, we had already talked about this after like, years after it happened, but I went back to her after I confronted my abuser and said, "I just need you to know that this was really important to me, that I asked him to apologize to you, and I just need you to know that he declined because he didn't think he did anything wrong." But just to there's so much more to the story. But just to kind of close it out, I then approached the elder leadership of this church, and I left a review on the church website, which is or on the Google of this church that's been viewed thousands of times, where I regale details of my abuse. And then I updated it after the church eldership said that they investigated my claims of harm, but didn't want to enact any policies. Like, I knew that they weren't going to become an affirming church, but I was like, hey, if this happens again, what are some things that we can do to make sure that people aren't harmed in the future? And then I
Mhm.
asked them questions like, is it like, does your church think it is appropriate for pastoral staff to be asking 19-year-olds about their masturbation habits, like very intimate details, which I find really repugnant now being on the other side.
Mhm.
Um, and they rallied behind him and nothing will happen to him. So,
Of course. I mean, that's the way the story always goes. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of John MacArthur, who has a mega church out in California, but he's one of his, I don't know if he was an elder, but one of the leaders in his church was abusing his wife and his children. And when his wife left him, they sided with him even after he confessed to attempted murder of one of his
mhm.
children. And then after she left, she moved to another state because she was so, there was so much hatred against her by the other members of the church, even not coming to the church. They would still find her in the community and harass her. She moved to Texas, and one of the children disclosed that the father had also sexually abused this
Oh
child.
my goodness.
And the man was tried and convicted and went to jail. The woman kept quiet until the children reached adulthood, and then she came public with her story. And even to this day, there are people that are still supporting this guy that went to jail, saying, well, yeah, he was convicted, but we don't know for sure that he really did it. I'm like, what more do you need? Do you need a video of him doing it? I mean, my gosh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Frankenstein asks, "Is this Baptist?" John MacArthur's church is not. He is a Calvinist, and so I believe his. Well, actually, there are some Baptists that are Calvinists. I'm not sure. His is Calvary Church. I'm not sure if it's actually affiliated. What church was denomination was the church you're talking about?
It was SBC.
SBC. Okay. Yeah, that's not surprising. They've had that huge expose showing that they've been covering up sexual abuse in their church for a long time, and there's a list of 700 sexual abusers among the leadership that they just move the leaders around so that um, there's not too many allegations in one place.
Yeah, I was waiting to see if, and actually was really surprised that I haven't seen anything come forward about the church where I was abused because one, it's very large. And when you have numbers at that scale, I just feel like it's almost inevitable that that's going to happen. But then also
Mm.
after seeing how they handled me when I came forward, um, with grievances against someone on the staff. They weren't interested in doing the whole like biblical reconciliation where like if your brother is upset with you and they come to you and then you go to the elders and all that stuff. Like I did everything according to the Bible that they believed in, but they have no interest. But I've been really surprised, not that I was hoping that that happened at my church, but I'm surprised given the scale because it's so prevalent. Like it's the perfect storm because you have a bunch of men who believe that they have this God ordained authority and it cannot be questioned.
Mhm, mhm. Yep. Um, yeah, I'll go ahead and go to the comments that I've been holding on to for a while. They're both from Mark Caesar. First, he says, I hope you feel comfortable in this community, Mozzie. We have all sorts here, very accepting. Hell, they even accept me.
Well, thank you.
And then the other one question, if Mozzie knew any of the others that were going through the, oh, did you know any others going through the same therapy? And if so, did any of the others do any self harm or suicide? I hear it's very common with conversion therapy.
Yes, that is very, very common. I did not know anyone because when I was in the true like clinical setting as a minor, with people who were supposed to be part of an actual psychiatry like board certification, of course, I was not going to know any of the other clients that they saw. And it wasn't like my church was making referrals or anything like that. Um, and I mean, again, given the size of the church that I attended where I was abused when I was in undergrad, I find it really hard to imagine that there was not someone else like me who
Yeah.
had this upbringing and really valued their faith and were trying to navigate a really complicated and nuanced journey of self-discovery and reconciling that with something that they've been handed and told this is of utmost importance. And so it would not surprise me if this was happening to other people simultaneously, which was why I was trying to work with the church leadership to create a framework um, to protect people in the future. Because if it hasn't happened again, which I find unlikely, it will happen again. And the thing that really really irks me and to me demonstrates the hollowness of a lot of this type of Christianity is when I told them these were the consequences of what your church did to me. I wanted to end my life, and I now have a permanent PTSD disorder and a panic disorder that I am medicated for because of my experiences in the house of God. Like, they were like, so uh, there was no regard for
I'm
my
just
well-being.
laughing because to me that just seems like an absolutely ridiculous reaction. You know,
Mhm.
that reaction is just laughably
Right.
ridiculous.
I mean, I told them, and I'm fine to talk about it,
Mhm,
because I've done the hard work, and now I feel myself privileged to be sitting here on the other side, wanting to be an advocate, but also prevent this harm in the future because it shouldn't have happened in the first place.
mhm,
But then, like, to be on the other side of the table and explain, like, look at them very clearly and say, I wanted to end my life because of something you did. And they're like,
mhm,
no, no. I mean, it's ludicrous.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and if a child fell out of the balcony, I imagine they would say it was the kid's fault.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't have any responsibility for something like making the balcony too low, you know?
Yeah.
Um, are you okay with saying the name of the church, or do you still live too close to it or have too much connection to it to do that?
I am not sure how I feel about that yet, just because,
Okay.
like, my review was posted with my actual name on,
Ah, okay, okay.
and so
And they
and
didn't remove it?
no, they didn't remove my review, and I updated it after I had conversations with the elders and said, "Oh, this is what happened," and they opted to protect my abuser instead.
Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, it's been viewed, I think, like, over 1,000 times. And then, like, I have friends, that I grew up with, um, who one of my friends and his wife set up a church plant offshoot of this church, and then
Mhm,
someone else that I grew up with attends this church still, and I told them what happened,
mhm,
and they both still attend this church and, like,
mhm,
don't seem very concerned. I don't know, I don't wanna speak for them, but that's kind of how, like, if this happened to one of my friends, I would have approached the leadership and been like, "What happened?" And then probably have left that church because I find that really unsettling.
Mhm.
But as far as I know, they're still attending and don't seem very concerned about it.
Mark Caesar says, Mozzie, I'm very glad you didn't end your life and that you're here to give your views and add to the richness of this world.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind.
Mhm. And I certainly agree with that thought. So, how do you still have a decent relationship with your parents or with your family?
Yeah, I have a wonderful relationship with my parents. And then I have a really, really good relationship with my sister as well.
Okay. So when they found out that you were not straight, did they accept you?
So the when I was a minor, the counselor disclosed um, to my parents, but this was like really far into the treatment. I don't the treatment. And I believe it was like at the tail end. Um, and so I think they were just kind of like, well, we'll let this wrap up and kind of see what happens. Unbeknownst to me, I discussed this with my mom like a decade later, but he had told them that there was a chance that I would like never be cured. But that wasn't what he told me. He was like, he made promises to me that he couldn't deliver, but then he told my parents, he was like, "Don't get your hopes up." But, like, that never felt like an option for me, which is, like, just really interesting to kind of get that sneak peek behind the curtain. But, kind of after that, it was one of those things where we just didn't talk about it.
Mhm.
Um, and, um, I just went on my own journey and then got to a point where I was ready to come out, like, I had figured it out and was ready, and I had grown into myself, and it was one of those things too where, like, I think I really needed to, like, after I left from undergrad, I wanted to go somewhere where no one knew me
Mhm.
and just start over, and
Mhm.
when I felt like I had my feet underneath me was when I was ready to, come out, and I came out to them and they like weren't surprised. Like, I mean, they obviously already knew, but then I was able to introduce them to my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband. So
That is cool. That is cool. So they have no problem with your relationship with your husband.
no, they came to my wedding. I it's a difficult and complicated topic because my parents attend a different church than the one that I grew up in, and um,
That's odd.
yeah, and they still attend one, that is kind of it's a PCA church,
Mhm.
um, and I've had, like, a lot of conversations with my mom in particular because she's, like, the one who's really theological on topics like this, and I've talked to her about, like, inerrancy and stuff, and, recently, I think we've just come to a place where we just have agreed we're not gonna talk about it,
Yeah.
and the reason that I was pushing so hard was I was trying to explain to her, I was like, "I don't care." Like, there are great churches, like because I've marched with priests before from, like, the Episcopalian tradition, um,
Mhm.
in pride marches, right? And like, that's fine because they're not harmful. They are advocating for my right to exist. But what's hard is, like, I've tried to explain to my parents, like, "Do you know where your money goes when you give to this organization?" Because if they are preaching this message that stands at odds against my rights, like, I have a little bit of issue with you funding that because that's how it feels to me. So
Mhm.
there's, like, some delicate topics, but, like, my parents came to the wedding and we had an amazing time, and they love my husband, um, and I think one of the interesting things moving forward is, I'm interested because I think my mom advocates on my behalf with her siblings who are much, much more conservative.
Mm.
And so I think there could be some interesting conversations to have in the future because, like, my cousins, for example, like, I believe wrote thank you notes to donors who helped build the Ark Encounter. So there's a lot of levels here to this cake, but
Okay, we have a comment from Frankenstein. Since conversion therapy is illegal for, it's supposed to be licensed therapist. He has a correction down below to conduct. Should it not be for churches considering the repeated evident damage? Is there a movement to make it illegal? It is illegal, but I don't. Well, I'll let you handle that one, Mozzie. Do you know anything about?
So I'm not the legal expert on this, but I have tried to read up on some of the laws because one thing that I was interested in trying to do was with my like hold my initial abuser accountable for when I was a minor because that should not have happened. He was an LPC. But looking at my understanding of the code of ethics from when that happened and also the state, I don't think that they have specific laws against that. It might have been unethical, but I don't know that it was necessarily criminal. And then what gets even more fuzzy is when you transition over into the religious space.
Right.
This is where the key is, and something that I really, really want to hammer home is important. There is a big difference between someone who identifies as a biblical counselor versus someone who is an LPC, because biblical counselors are not trained to actually do like clinical help and mental health services. They are given a Bible and told basically beat people with this until they behave the way that you really expect, because it's up to your interpretation as the biblical counselor. And there's no oversight. Whereas someone who's an LPC has credentials from an organization like a university that is accredited, and then they're supposed to be responsible to the board. And so if there's some kind of ethics violation, if it's not necessarily criminal, but like the one that comes to mind, maybe not the best example, but like if an LPC is providing services to a full-grown adult and then it comes to light that they have been having a romantic relationship, that's unethical and they can lose their ability to practice. But it's not necessarily criminal, I think, in that
Mhm.
instance. So it's unethical. And in some states like California, I believe it is illegal for minors, but it's not necessarily illegal everywhere. And it's like, how do you prove that this is happening? It's very, very complicated, and we need much clearer laws that protect minors specifically. Because in California, I believe the law that they passed protects minors even in a religious environment. So it would protect them
Mm.
from like they cannot undergo what looks like conversion therapy in a religious environment as a minor. You are only allowed to say, I want help with this as an adult, in which case I think LPCs and true licensed professionals, it is unethical for them to do that within the framework where they're licensed. So the only place that you would be able to do that would be in a religious setting.
Nom 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 said that unfortunately, conversion therapy is not illegal in the UK.
Yeah, it's a big blind spot, I think, generally across the world.
And Nadia wants you to know that there's more queer representation here.
I'm glad that more of the alphabet mafia is joining us.
Let's see. Purple says there's only a couple of states in the US that have passed laws against conversion therapy. I was not aware of that. I thought it was illegal everywhere, but I thought it was illegal as a therapy practice, but that it was a licensing thing within the therapeutic community, not a like a state law, but evidently there are some state laws against it.
Well, and the other thing too, I haven't looked at this in a while. It's probably been a year or two since I was researching this, but I I want to say that it was actually pretty recent that like the APA guidelines actually changed their recommendations on like trying to modify someone's sexual orientation, and actually came out against it and said it is actually harmful. I don't
Mhm.
think that it was that long ago, which was why like when I was trying to look at what the ethics were at the time for the LPC that I was seeing, um, because of like when that change may have happened, it wasn't necessarily unethical at the time because I really believe it was that recent.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, because I haven't heard a whole lot about this until fairly recently as well. And yeah, the wheels of justice turn very slowly.
Yes. Well, and a lot of times, you can't try and get justice for when it happened. It's really a
Hmm.
new initiative that has kind of popped up recently because we realize, oh my God, this is a problem.
Hmm. Hmm. Mark Caesar says, I've talked to Michael Busey, an ex-leader of the ex-gay conversion therapy, and he said that every case of conversion, the converts would always revert to their natural sexuality sooner or later.
Yep. I mean, Alan Chamberlain even said, like, you know, in his statement after they closed down Exodus International, he, I believe, at some point made the comment. He was like, "We didn't change anyone."
Mark says, not ex-gay, Exodus International. Okay. Okay. So, how are you doing now?
I mean, really, like my life has been fantastic. I think one of the big things, like it took me several years to just kind of understand what happened to me.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't realize like how unethical these things were until I
Mhm.
started seeing other people's stories, which was why I'm excited to contribute to the conversation because um, the first time I heard a story, I was like looking to see what other people were saying and if there were other people like me because the more I heard, I was like, this is exactly what happened to me. Um, and so, it was a years long process to kind of overcome a lot of the trauma and baggage that I had been carrying around, but that culminated in being able to reclaim the voice that was taken from me, and confronting my abuser, and then now trying to advocate on behalf of people who haven't found their voice yet. So things are really good. And, like I mentioned at the top of the program, like, I just got married and we have like a really fantastic life together. It's been really wonderful. Things have really just gotten better. It was, difficult in the pandemic and like I went back to school and stuff because it was just good timing. But, all that stuff is kind of teed up now and over and done with and just enjoying the newlywed married life and being young professionals with no kids for the time being, so it's been really great.
Purple says, I'm not, Frankenstein, I'm not surprised by that. I would think the only way they would seem fixed is if they remained celibate. And I wanted to bring up this comment because there's a couple of things that you said that reminded me of what changed my mind, how I traveled from being an ultra conservative homophobe to where I am today. And the first step for me was a book by Christopher Yuong called Out of a Far Country. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. I doubt it.
No.
Um, he is a Bible teacher at Moody Bible Institute, which gives his book a great deal of credibility. And his argument is that, gay people are gay, and you're not going to change that. They are gay. Um, but he is very conservative himself, and so his position is that gay people need to be celibate, and if they want to live a Christian life, if they want to be dedicated to God and be Christians, then they need to be celibate. And while I wouldn't agree with Yuang anymore, that first step for me was getting to realize that gay people are gay. Christopher Yuang himself is gay. That's why he wrote the book.
Mm,
And he does a lot of counseling at Moody Bible Institute with gay students, telling them that it's okay to be gay. If you're gay, that's just the way you are. But if you want to please God, you have to be celibate. Now, I realize that idea is in and of itself problematic, but if you can, when you read the book, you really can get the understanding that a person's sexual orientation is not something that they choose. It's not something that you know, I guess I'm having a little trouble searching for words here, but it's not something that they can change either. And that was a good first step. And then for me, the second step was reading the book, um, Mama's Boy, Preacher's Son by, I can't remember his name, but he's the guy that started GLAD.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and he takes it a step further. He also is a believer. He just interprets some of the Bible differently and says, why should gay people be not permitted to marry?
Hmm.
And so that was the next step in me being able to be accepting of the gay community. And it's not much different with the queer community or the transgender community. I found that a lot of books have helped me by hearing other people's stories, like your story.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear how either other queer people ended up becoming affirming of their own identities while they were in the faith, or hearing, our allies and advocates and how they made that shift, because it's really different for everyone. And like in retrospect now, I can really laugh at myself because it's really funny to me. I actually became LGBTQ affirming while still like believing in inerrancy, which I know
Mhm,
sounds like completely crazy. But what did it for me was like actually reading my Bible. And when I saw the passages about slavery, and then I'm like, well, obviously I don't condone slavery. So something in my interpretation has to give. It gave me the space that I needed to be able to say, oh, well, I can be a queer person and still have
mhm,
a faith that was meaningful. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's funny to me now because I'm like, okay, well, if you guys really, really want to hold to being anti-LGBTQ, like I need you to say the quiet part out loud that like you have to accept slavery as like part of your God's will and plan.
mm,
Um,
m'kay.
because that was a hard line for me. I have too many friends of color, and my husband is a person of color, and a lot of my research when I was in grad school, like it's a topic that interests me because the way that we structure our cities and the built environment intrinsically impacts social equity, and the people who always end up with less are the people who have less resources, and that oftentimes is people of color. And so like when you start to understand how all of these things factor together, there was no room left for me in the Bible to and my interpretations to be like, oh yeah, like this slavery is different. No, no, it's not. Like it's wrong to own people, full stop. And then that gave me the space to be like, and if that's the case, then I can allow myself and others to be who they are, because I don't think that that's what God's best is for us. So anyways, it was interesting kind of how that started, but yeah, I became an affirming Christian who still clung to inerrancy, but affirmed LGBTQ people, which I think is really funny now in retrospect.
Mhm, mhm. I got to that point as well. Toward the end of my days as a Christian, I was a more liberal Christian. Um, and I definitely was affirming of the LGBTQ community as one of those areas of being liberal. But yeah, my theology still tended to be very conservative as well. Um, so what do you enjoy doing now?
Well, I am a bit of a homebody. So, on a weekend like this, especially now that the weather's getting nicer, like I like to sit at home, drink tea, play some video games. We have been traveling a lot more recently since everything opened up and I finished with school. So, we had a wonderful honeymoon. We were in Spain for 2 weeks, but we've
Oh,
also been flying
nice.
around the country some. We flew up to DC to see Amy Poehler and Tina Fey, and anyways, just like trying to travel and find these little special moments where we can sneak away together and just enjoy the time that we have together. So it's been really fun. We've had a really great year. And then every year we work on things for our local pride. And so just trying to be a part of the community that way. But yeah, and then, really the rest of it is we're two young professionals in our late 20s. Um, you know, so we're at work, weekdays and come home tired, trying to find the time to work out, cook dinner, all of that stuff. But yeah, just trying to juggle it all, have it all.
If you could give some advice to a young person who is gay or queer or just any member of the LGBTQ community who is feeling this kind of oppression, who is undergoing some kind of, not necessarily therapy, it might just be church counseling or, just a bad relationship with a church pastor, what would your advice be to this young person?
Yeah, I'll try to be succinct because there's just so many different ways I could go. But with just a really short anecdote, sorry, I'm trying to get the sun like off my face. um, but I remember being like a Christian, and before I was affirming, like I would see queer couples, and like part of me really wanted what they had, but
Mm,
like I was just like, there's no way that they're happy because that's not what the Bible promises. And I would hear this tagline from other people, like if I saw coming out stories or something on YouTube, where they made this promise and they're like, it gets better. And I just didn't believe that for so long. And not only do I realize now that I was wrong, but like my life existed in the most boring colors of beige. And like to be so happy and like have a wonderful marriage to a wonderful partner and just have like so much to look forward to, where my life is not a list of do's and don'ts, but I just get to exist as who I am. It's amazing. Like it doesn't just get better. Like it, the your life isn't don't do this. You get to be present and partake in something that is so precious that is being denied. Like so it really does get better when you find the strength and when it's your time to come out. And you get to do that on your terms too. So there's no rush. You do it when it's safe and when it's your time and when you're ready. Um, and I think the other thing, um, you know, the conversion therapy in particular, or if you're in environments that are really hostile to you existing as who you are, like the conversion therapy or these sentiments are only as effective as your own willingness to police your thought crimes. And when you shrug off somebody else's expectations of how you are supposed to perform your identity or your gender, when you are no longer performing for somebody else's comfort, it's liberating. I just remember like waiting for that day where I was supposed to get that freedom in Christ that was promised to me. And the my religion was my chains,
mhm.
and I didn't find the freedom that I was promised until I left it behind. So
And the freedom finally came when you decided to be you.
yeah,
Mhm,
absolutely. And it's one of those things where that expression can look like so many different things. For me, I think I enjoy being visibly queer. Like I take public transit to work and I have a backpack that's got rainbows on it. And I don't mind now being the person that I was always looking for when I was in the closet, because being able to see people who can be themselves and are proud of that person is really, really important. And I enjoy being the person. And like, if there's a little kid who stares at me for, a moment longer than probably is socially acceptable, that's fine because that was me. And I was looking for someone who looked like me who had made it.
mhm,
And
mhm.
then if that's not you and you don't want to be that kind of visibly queer person, or if you're just an ally, um, but like advocating for those people, like I have a friend who's a teacher and it was funny, she's straight, but she told me, she was like, yeah, I'm just surprised at like how many of my students have like come out to me. And I'm like, well, you have a pride flag in your room and you're the English teacher, so like that trope totally makes sense. But visibly being an ally makes room for people to grow into who they are. So those are really, my two thoughts on the matter.
That's really good. And to add to that, I have a shirt that has a pride flag on it and it says ally. And I was wearing it when we were traveling and we were going through JFK Airport. We were in this huge crowd of people. We were going down an escalator and there was a man that was coming up the stairs. He got about halfway up the stairs and he turned around and came halfway back down and turned to me and said, "Thank you for being an ally." And that was just so charming and so
Yeah.
yeah, that made me feel so good. He not only noticed my shirt, but he turned around and came halfway back down the stairs in this huge crowd just to tell me thank you for being an ally.
Yeah, it really does matter. Like, because again, I know what it was like before I was ready to be that person who saw, a gay couple at a restaurant. And yeah, I hope I didn't make anybody uncomfortable, but like, I know what it was like to just kind of stare and wonder and be like, could I have that? And just kind of vicariously living through these people. And yeah, it's possible. But the important thing is you do it when it's safe and it's on your terms. So,
We're out of time, but I'm going to take one last question that we have in the chat, which is, do you look back on religion with any misgivings?
um, well, it's hard. And I know we're running out of time, but I think I'm getting a little tripped up on the word misgivings because I think what's important to take into consideration is um, I didn't choose how I was brought up, and so some of these things were handed to me. And I think if I
Hmm.
had chosen it, you can look back on something and be like, "Oh, I regret this decision that I made." And so some of these things were decisions that were made for me. I didn't choose to have shame. The shame that I
Hmm.
had was given to me from someone else. And so when I realized that, I was empowered to shake that off. So, um, it I have a lot of disdain for certain ideas, but I'm not necessarily mad at certain people who subscribe to them. I'm mad at the people who perpetuate harm while being confronted and should know better. But there are other, like I attended an Episcopalian church as an agnostic and straight up told the priest when I started attending, like I met with him for an hour and was asking questions. Um, And I was like, "I don't even know if I believe." And he's like, "Welcome." And then I was like, "I don't believe in hell anymore." And he's like, "Cool." He's like, "You'll find a lot of different opinions on that kind of stuff here." Um, and he said, "If hell is real, then let's pray that it's empty." And I had
Mm-hmm.
never heard something like that from
Hmm.
a more fundamentalist setting before. So I think that there
Hmm.
are places where it can be like a really good thing and there are really positive parts of being in a community like that. But the ones that are being a little bit more driven by their humanism and an understanding of kind of like how things work in the real world, I'm like pretty much down with that. It's this fundamentalist type of Christianity that is actively causing harm and perpetuating it. That's where my, I guess, misgivings are. So I just want to make like the clear delineation between like the ones who cause harm versus other people who sit kind of underneath this broader umbrella of Christianity.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that, Mozzie. It has been a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Um, just a couple of announcements. Next week, there will be no stream. My nephew is getting married, and I am going to be out of town at my nephew's wedding. The following week, on the 21st, the guest will be Prophet of Zod.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was really happy to be able to get Prophet of Zod to come. I had
Yeah, that's gonna
asked
be
him
awesome.
about 2 years ago, and he said he really didn't like doing live streams, so when he started doing live streams, I was like, "Can you come on mine?" And then he said yes. So I was really happy. All right, yeah, thank you so much. This has been a great time, hearing from you, and you have a really interesting story.
Well, thank you so much for having me and just giving me an opportunity to share.
Live your life.